That's happening. Yes, there we go. So good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Your Sustainability Journey, Exploring Government Careers in Sustainability. I'm Mark Han, Green Gov Council Director, and I'm looking forward to today's panel discussion, and this session seems very timely to me based on what's happening nationally right now with government jobs. Today we have the Commonwealth, Commonwealth employees from 5 different agencies offering to share how their careers, at least in part, have landed on aspects of sustainability, what they like about these government jobs, and how their interests and backgrounds have led them here today. We're intending for this session to be interactive with our audience today, so please plan to ask our panelists questions. If you are a student that's interested in jobs within state government, this is a great opportunity to learn and ask your questions about work being done in state government and paths each employee has taken to get here. And if you are tuning in and you're not planning to pursue state government work, that's great too. We're happy to have you here today, and we think you'll also enjoy this session and hearing about the work that is being done in our state, and also encourage you to ask questions. But before we jump into the panel discussion today, I wanted to say a few words about Green Gov Council, as well as introduce our webinar series partner, Penn State Sustainability. So in case you didn't know, the Green Gov Council was established through executive order and requires Commonwealth agencies to lead by example on environmental sustainability. And you can learn more about our program on the Green Gov website, which is located at dgs.pa.gov/GreenGov, to see how agencies are meeting performance goals and addressing sustainability. And also on our web, you'll find information such as recordings of past sustainability series webinars. We are fast approaching the end of our 6th webinar series with Penn State. And so we are developing quite a library of sustainability topics from over the years with this partnership, and you can find all those on the web. The final webinar in this 6th series will be held on April 18th, where the PA Army National Guard will be presenting their program called the Keystone State Challenge Academy. And this is a tuition-free program for Pennsylvania teens aged 16 to 18. The teens in this program have been identified as being in jeopardy of graduating from high school, and the National Guard teaches self-discipline and the skills necessary to succeed and as a productive and responsible citizen. So please check that out next month, and it should be a nice discussion. The Green Gov Council website also features the Pennsylvania Climate Network, and the Climate Network currently has a free 8-hour climate training available, and the training is broken up into 4 modules. And those that complete the training receive a certificate of completion. And we encourage you also to join our mailing list and our network and get involved with this growing the mission of the network to develop climate leaders in Pennsylvania. And then finally, well, not really finally, there's a lot more on the web, but additionally, Sustainable Buildings Education Video Series is also on the web, which is a partnership of Penn State and funded by the U.S. Department of Energy State Energy Program. And the video series highlights the importance of building green building characteristics such as integrated project design, energy efficiency, material and resource efficiency, indoor environmental quality, embodied carbon, and many other topics. So please take a look at that and some of the other web resources that we have available. So just moving this along, today's webinar is co-hosted and supported through our partnership with Penn State. And I now want to introduce Peter Boger. Peter Boger is the Director for Engagement at Penn State Sustainability and is responsible for developing strategic programming and partnerships that help Penn State leverage its resources to promote sustainability through the Penn State campuses. Peter, welcome and happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you, Mark and Matt, as always, for this great partnership. As Matt mentioned, or Mark mentioned, this is the end of near the end of our 6th series that we've been doing with the Green Gov Council. And this is a key collaboration for us. The Penn State Sustainability is the Office of the Chief Sustainability Officer at Penn State. We serve all 24 campuses within the Penn State system, and Penn State, as the land grant institution for the state of Pennsylvania is in service of the entire Commonwealth. And it is things like this webinar series in partnership with the GreenGov Council that allow us to really be out there and serving all of our communities. We as an office are pretty tiny. We are only 14 people. And obviously that's not enough to change sustainability across the entire Penn State system. But like the GreenGov Council, what we've recognized is that sustainability is not owned by any one person, that it is the job and the responsibility of all of us. And as I think you're going to hear today from our speakers, sustainability really touches so many different careers in so many different ways that often it's not about your job being labeled as sustainability. It is about thinking about the work that you do and how you reframe it to pursue and advance sustainable principles. And that's an exciting aspect of the work. And it's one of the exciting things is it means there are so many more ways that you can make a meaningful impact. So I'm not going to delay us anymore in getting into the great speakers we have today, because I think you're going to hear from them about the importance of sustainable careers and how you can make an impact in yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. And we want to now introduce our panelists for today. And so I'm going to just kind of introduce everyone real quickly, and then as the panelists, if you can all remember the order that I introduce you, so that maybe you can we'll go back through and give you a chance to say a little bit about yourselves, to introduce yourselves a little bit more deeply than what I'm going to do for your introduction here. So to start, we have Allie Bowling, Executive Policy Specialist of Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Robert Gottlieb of Department of Health. He's an Epidemiology Research Associate in the Division of Environmental Health Epidemiology. And we have Dr. Colleen Unruh, William and Hannah Penn Fellow from the Department of Environmental Protection. Roy Goethe, Executive Policy Specialist for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. And last but not least, we have Lydia Franks, Governor's Science and Technology Fellow with the Department of Agriculture. So I'm going to, maybe, Matt, you can go back to okay, we can do that too. So we'll start with Allie, and Allie, Robert, Colleen, Roy, and Lydia. And if you can all just sort of give a little bit more of a background on, what your bio a little bit more to introduce yourselves. I'll turn it over to Allie. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. I'm excited to be here with you today. So as it was mentioned, I'm Allie Bowling, and I always say, if you want to remember my name, it's like a bowling alley. That's like my intro joke to every conference I go to. But yeah, I've been with the Commonwealth for about 2.5 years now, and previous to that, I worked in private industry in the manufacturing sector, doing environmental product compliance, environmental health and safety, and sustainability. And then previous to that, I worked in the nonprofit sector while getting my degree. And so I've kind of tested all of the sectors. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But as the executive policy specialist, I work on department level policy. So I look at the priorities of the secretary of DCNR and the governor and try to figure out a pathway forward to meet those priorities. And then I also work a lot with partner agencies, and I do a lot of project management. So it's a little bit about me. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thanks. So my starting, I loved weather ever since I was a little kid. I knew very early that I wanted to study meteorology, and I did that in undergraduate and graduate school. And over time, I became really interested not just in forecasting the weather, but in understanding like how weather affects society, how it affects especially populations that have been made more vulnerable for a variety of reasons to natural hazards, and how can we do a better job of protecting them, keeping them safe. And along the way, I also learned a type of technology called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, that you may have heard of. This is a way of representing spatial data on a map on your computer, doing different analysis and visualization techniques with it. So in addition to studying meteorology, then I started studying geography as well, and those GIS skills eventually led me to a job as a GIS analyst with the Indiana Department of Health, and I was there for several years, and now I'm working on variety of different health-related projects, and now I'm at the Pennsylvania Department of Health, where I've been for the last 2 years working as an epidemiology research associate on working on impacts of weather and climate on public health. So bringing back then that meteorology knowledge with the geography and health knowledge along the way. Thanks. Colleen's up next.
Hello, I'm Colleen Unruh. So I work with the Department of Environmental Protection as the William and Hannah Penn Fellow, which is a 2-year position. In terms of my background, I got an undergrad degree in environmental studies a long time ago. Then I worked in Eastern Kentucky for 8 years as a community organizer, working primarily around environmental justice issues, so things related to the coal industry. And then we increasingly became involved with Appalachian transition, or how do we transition the economy past fossil fuels. I then went to Penn State for my master's in rural sociology because I wanted to continue to work on proactive solutions. Got my PhD in adult education, and I was really looking at the learning and education that is needed for folks to engage in efforts around clean energy and sustainability. I worked for a year as a visiting professor in environmental studies at Dickinson, and with the opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act and IIJA, I wanted to see what working in the government would look like, and really thinking about those policy opportunities as a space to make sure that the resources that were available through that were going to the right communities. So my role is a little bit unique in that I'm based in the policy office, but I also work very closely with the energy programs office, really focused on, some on energy related policy, but also community engagement and how do we make sure that communities that are underrepresented are accessing clean energy and energy efficiency resources. Thanks. And I think it's Roy.
Yep, it's Roy. So good afternoon, everyone. Like a lot of the folks here, I'm currently working in policy, transportation policy specifically. It's a very interesting position because you touch a little bit of everything. Unlike some of my colleagues in policy, I've had a long history in transportation, back as far as 2008, working in the Maryland State Highway Administration, mostly on project management and the funding for planning and programming. Before that, I got master's degrees in environmental science and water resource policy from Michigan. And long before that, undergraduate degrees in wildlife management and environmental science from West Virginia University. I've been basically driven by curiosity and opportunity the whole way forward, taking probably more classes than were good for me, and always asking questions. So that's how I ended up in the policy department, where I get to touch on a lot of the sustainability and climate change issues the department's working with.
So I think it's me next. So hi, I'm Lydia. I'm a Governor's Science and Technology Fellow with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. I am originally from Northeast Ohio, and I always say, so I grew up with the Cuyahoga Valley National Park right in my backyard, and that's always famous as the Cuyahoga River is the river that caught on fire. We really don't know how many times. So that kind of sparked my interest in the environment and all things natural resources, water resources related. So I completed my undergraduate degree in environmental science, and then in between my undergrad and grad school, I worked for about 4 years. I eventually moved from Northeast Ohio out east into the greater Philadelphia area region, which is where I'm at right now. I kind of got my foot in the door in this field as a local park ranger in Montgomery County, and worked there for a little bit, moved into consulting, worked as an environmental scientist, doing some NPDES permit sampling, things like that. And from there, I ended up at the University of Delaware pursuing my master's of science degree in water science and policy, while simultaneously working as a graduate research assistant at the Water Resources Center. And then from there is where I ended up where I am today as a fellow with the state. And a lot of my work right now is involving agricultural innovation, and there's just so many different areas of sustainability and environmental resource areas and topics that cross into agriculture. And it's really interesting to be able to see all of those and work in all of those little areas and kind of have my hands in a little bit of everything. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Thanks, Lydia. And thanks, panel, for introducing yourselves. This is going to be a fun discussion, and just want to remind our audience to please do drop questions in the chat. We just want to keep this as interactive as possible. As much as you want to get out of it, we'd like to, work with you on answering your questions. So I'm going to just take the first question, and this is kind of a think back kind of question. When you were in college, whatever, whether it was recently or quite a long time ago, where did you imagine yourself working in the future? And then has working in state government allowed you to pursue some of those goals and use the skills that you imagined that you'd be using back then when you were in college? So this is open to anyone. Feel free to just answer. So anyone want to take the stab at the first question?
Hey, Mark. I'm happy to do that. I actually thought a little bit about this, and I have 2 activities to recommend to current college students, but I'll get to that in a minute. So when I started college, I thought I'd be a meteorologist. I was interested in weather, and I wanted to chase tornadoes. And so I went to the University of Oklahoma, like Robert did, and so I think that's a little funny. We have 2 OU grads here, but I realized that career pretty early on was not going to be for me. I just didn't see a career path that was going to work. And so there was limited careers in chasing tornadoes, as you could imagine. And so at that time, I started working in wildlife rehabilitation. And so I pivoted to getting an environmental science degree. And so I'm someone who's never had a full picture of who I'm going to be when I grow up. I still don't know. I'm going to be honest. And I've kind of been pretty agile in my career and taken the next best opportunity and just trying to figure it out. But there have been 2 activities that I've done along my career, and I didn't do them in college. I wish I had. So one is identifying my values and trying to align my values with my work. I think there is something really important there. And then the second thing was an exercise that I had learned on a podcast, and it's called a Climate Action Venn Diagram by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. And you don't have to just do it around climate action. I did, but you don't have to. I think it's just a really cool exercise where you create a Venn diagram. In one circle, you put what you're good at. In a second circle, you put the work that needs doing. And then in the third circle, you put what brings you joy. And you try to find this intersection of all 3 of those things. And you try to spend as much time in that circle as you can. So your career is not going to always be in that circle. But I think it's a good exercise to identify some of these things as you think about your career. And I just want to mention that in state government, I have been able to use my skill set, and I've been able to hone my skill set. So creating partnerships and building relationships. I mean, that is a huge part of my career, and I've been able to do that in state government. It's very important. Thinking about critical issues and critically thinking about those things, and then creative problem solving. So I've been able to do that well in my role in government, but just throwing those out there. Thanks.
Great advice, Allie. Yeah, thanks. I think I was kind of floated around myself a little bit too. So go ahead, Lydia.
I would love to answer this because this is like right up my alley. I had no clue what I was doing in undergrad. I started out as an undecided major and then moved into maybe I want to do criminal justice, and then eventually decided, well, I want to work in law enforcement, but I want a degree that I can kind of fall back on in case I don't like it. And I chose environmental science. And I'm glad I did that because that is exactly what happened to me. So I essentially I went to Alaska and pursued a career in law enforcement. I think I knew at the time that I didn't want to do that, but everyone was saying, oh, you're right out of college. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Take it. And immediately came back to Ohio and said, I want to go to grad school. I really want to pursue this environmental science stuff. Because essentially my senior year of undergrad is when I just really started to gain a very deep interest in some of those higher level courses. And that's kind of how I ended up in the environmental field. But yeah, in between, like I was saying earlier, in between undergrad and grad school, I worked for 4 years. I kind of just job hopped trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. I really enjoyed working in local government and kind of picked up on, through working in different areas, you're kind of able to narrow down, okay, I know this is not what I want to do. So that kind of helps you picture what you do want to do more. And to echo Allie, like I still don't really know exactly what I want to be when I grow up. But I think being able to narrow down what you don't like, what you're not interested in, compared to like you really like something and you kind of want to move that direction, it's really helpful. But something that has helped me immensely and that I use every single day in my current job is something I learned in both undergrad and grad school, being able to read and digest and understand complex scientific literature. So taking scientific papers and just being able to quickly turn around, picking out key points and the summary points. And that's essentially what I'm doing in state government right now, is trying to bring science into policy and bridging those two areas. And again, that's something I use every single day, is just being able to do that. And that's probably my top skill set that I say, just absolutely get that down and you'll be fine.
That is a handy skill, isn't it? Yeah, thanks, Lydia. Colleen, let's keep going around here.
Great. So 2 stories that come to mind in terms of what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up. I actually knew from a very early on age, like 6th grade, I wanted to be an environmentalist. Like I actually grew up in Northeast Ohio as well. I didn't know that about you, Lydia, but so issues in my earth science class of like zebra mussels affecting Lake Erie and microinvertebrates and things like that. And I remember walking into the classroom feeling very disillusioned about climate change, which we called global warming way back in the day, and thinking, oh, I know what I should do. I should do this, or I should be an environmentalist when I grow up. Then like fast forward to being in college. During my summers in college, I worked for a nonprofit during the a nonprofit focused on housing issues. And I remember my parents being like, why do you keep going back to Appalachia and working on housing issues when you're trying to pursue environmental science? And I was like, I don't know, but this is what I feel passionate about. And really, like, all of these different pieces kind of connected together. I remember talking with a woman named Martha in West Virginia, who had flooding issues multiple years in a row, and needed housing assistance. I remember talking with her and saying, well, what do you think needs to be done? And part of the puzzle there was that the strip mining above her home was causing increased flooding that was, part of why she was having housing issues and needed help from a volunteer organization. And so it was like clear in that example or in that story that it's like, oh, folks that live in these communities know what are best positioned to know what their community needs, but maybe they don't have the resources or the tools or the power to actually enact change. And so I feel like although my roles have evolved, like I've always been interested in environmental justice, in addressing systemic issues, in helping to support communities to advance their vision. And I think that I definitely am able to focus on that within this government role, and just thinking about some of the specific programs I've helped to support, like the MORE program. We've helped to get $800,000 to communities that wouldn't have even known about the opportunity to increase energy efficiency if we hadn't reached out to them. We're currently doing climate action workshops across the state, and this I'm cueing Mark to
Yes.
share the flyer, but so like we just had 4 meetings this this week where people were talking about how climate is impacting them, what they think needs to happen. And it was and it speaks to the fact that it's really important to be engaging people directly affected by the problems, and that our work as government folks is stronger when we engage and collaborate with communities. So I would encourage you to check that out. We actually are having a workshop, a virtual workshop on April 17th in the evening. It'd be great to have your all's perspective as well.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks.
And yes, I dropped that in the chats. Roy, go ahead. I think you were next, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I was in high school. I grew up in very rural Fulton County, Pennsylvania, on my family's 500-acre property. We had several small businesses, but a lot of our income came from essentially either foresting, like harvesting the timber, or charging people money to come hunt and recreate on our property. And I couldn't imagine a better life at that time than staying on the property that had been in my family since, the 50s, and taking care of it, hence the wildlife management and environmental science. But as I got through college, I did some of this. I discovered there were problems I couldn't fix, and it was always more complicated the deeper you dug into it. While I initially kind of been focused on like Aldo Leopold and living in one place and taking care of our property and restoring it over time. Obviously, Pennsylvania has been forested pretty hard. Like there's a lot of lumber taken off the land several times, and building that property back. But then I got into like Edward Abbey and the idea that community health is about the health of the environment as well as the health of the human population that lives on and within the environment. That Distant Land was particularly a good book. So I went out and got into graduate school thinking about water policy, and I had some advice from professors who said, you need to take these other classes. And before I knew, I was, getting 2 degrees, and a lot of very widely spreading stuff. I did have GIS, I had statistics, which has, been very important in the policy realm. I don't need advanced mathematical statistics, but I need to be able to read those scientific and technical papers and explain that in a 1-page document to my boss. This is what they're talking about. This is why it's important. And here are the 3 things we need to do because of that. I think a lot of you are going to find that some of that is going to change. We have been working with OpenAI in a realm of policy through the governor's office. There's actually a live broadcast about the Commonwealth use of AI that was on at 11 o'clock today. And we looked at how do we develop GPT models and how do we do these things. So the things you're learning in college, you're going to have tools we never imagined to start thinking about how to manipulate data and statistics and present it. And so when I was in 1987 going to college, I could not imagine these tools. You had to learn it and write it and read it and present it. It's very different, but the problems are no less complex.
That's excellent. Good point.
Yep. And I'll go. Yeah. Ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to study meteorology from a young age. When I did my undergrad at Cornell University, I wanted to go to a really good meteorology program, but also get a really broad, really good liberal arts education too. And I think initially when I started college, I didn't exactly know, but I thought one of the most likely things I would do would be forecast the weather for the National Weather Service, which is a federal agency. So that was already giving me interest in government work, but then I realized there were day-to-day things about the job that I didn't necessarily want to do. And I was figuring that out by about my junior year or so. And also with the weather, like you have a perfect tornado forecast, or if we have a really great understanding of what climate change is going to do and all the effects that it's going to have, you have a perfect forecast. It's not going to mean anything if people like can't get the forecast or don't understand it or don't know what to do. So that's a big part of the reason I got more interested in these social impacts. And I happened to take, my first GIS course along the way, just kind of a whim, my senior year. And then, like Ali said, I went to the University of Oklahoma for grad school because I was really interested in tornadoes, especially. So that was such a great place to go to learn more about that. And it's learning more GIS along the way, different vulnerability metrics and ways to study that. And I wasn't really sure where that was going to lead. I was getting more interested in geography. But it took some time, but I was able to get a job in public health despite not having any background in public health. But it was the GIS skills that I could, use that and add that to the work that the public health experts were doing and learn along the way. So, translate the information that they were giving me into, understanding how could they put that on a map? How could they use that to help communicate risks, understand what was going on? So another example, kind of like being able to take other information, translate it, make it useful, and continue to learn along the way. And it turns out that meteorology and public health actually go together really well because in both fields you've got talented people who want to use scientific information to help protect people, help keep people safe. So that's such a big drive for both fields. So it actually goes together really well in terms of that mindset and what are your goals and what are you trying to achieve. And now I wasn't doing weather and climate work at the Indiana Department of Health, but now I get to do it at Pennsylvania. So things have kind of come full circle in that regard and be able to take these different parts of my different experiences. So that's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I think you've all answered that question, and we're at 12:30, so we have good 20 minutes. I'm going to maybe have Peter ask the next question and tee up the next question, and feel free to answer it completely, or you're welcome to pass if you need to, but we'll keep things moving along so we can get to some of the audience questions. And for the audience, please do consider questions as well. Thanks.
I know we've got at least one already in the chat. And I think actually you all answered sort of the second question already about that kind of journey between college and state government. I mean, listening to you all, one of the things I found so interesting was just how many of you changed degrees between undergrad and undergrad in terms of the field. And I know so often for a lot of our college students, there's this immense pressure of feeling like, oh my God, I have to nail it now. I got to know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And yet, I think having that conversation about values and also thinking through the skills and competencies that you pulled along the way, hopefully is helping our attendees today think about the fact that you don't have to nail it right as an undergrad, and you'll still have great, skills and great, opportunities and competencies no matter the degree, and still be able to move in lots of different directions. So I appreciate you all kind of sharing those zigs and zags, and also the thinking about what you take away that's valuable no matter where you land along the way in your career, even as you're still not sure what you're going to be when you grow up. So maybe jumping to our next question, now you all have landed in state government. And I think for a lot of people, there's still not a lot of awareness about what goes on in state government, what a state government job is like. So could you talk about what you like about working for state government? Are there aspects of the work that, a student, on the call today might not even be thinking about what makes it meaningful or valuable? And what do you like about the particular agencies you all are in?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. We don't have to go in order, but I'm happy to do it. Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question. I did want to add something that I think is important is I did a lot of volunteer work, and so consider that as you are currently in college or in between. You can volunteer and get expertise in something that will help you in your career. But Yeah, so my experience in government has been really positive. So what I like about government is it's very mission driven, especially in the conservation world. We're trying to conserve our natural resources for current and future generations' use and enjoyment at DCNR. And so, um, I enjoyed that about the nonprofit sector is it's very mission driven. You're trying to make the world a better place. But in government, there's maybe a little bit more guardrails, which I like. I like having policy and process and documents to things. And so I feel like it marries private industry and nonprofit world really well together. And so I've been fortunate enough to have a really good experience. DCNR has a great environment to work for. People are just so passionate about what they do. And I wanted to mention that working in conservation or sustainability takes so many different forms. You can be in procurement. You can have a background in budgets. We have a grant management bureau. We have that do a lot of project management work. We have the Geologic Survey. We have state parks and forestry. We have a legislative affairs office, communications office. So even if you're not in a specific, sustainability or environmental degree or have that background, you can still work towards that mission, and do this sort of work. And so, you know, there's a lot of great work happening. And I'm also the council coordinator. So DCNR has a Next Gen Advisory Council, which really focuses on bringing the voice of the next generation into our work. And so we do recruit for that in July, just putting a little plug out. And I'll put the link to the webpage in the chat. But I'm fortunate enough to manage that council with a facilitator, Function and Flow, who's amazing, Kelly McGinley. But there's a lot of great work happening there. And in my government role, I've been able to kind of move some of those things forward and help bring voices to the table. So I just want to throw those things out there. Thanks.
Roy raised his hand to go next.
So when I was growing up, in the 80s, some of you probably heard the quote from Ronald Reagan that, government is the problem and not the solution. And I really want to suggest that that is not, in fact, the case. I started working with the government, and it's a learning curve. Allie mentioned there's a lot of policies and regulations and procedures to go through over time. You got to kind of learn that. That takes probably 2 years in a position before you really understood the flow. For grant writing, for example, you put out proposals, you review proposals, you get a sense of what to look for in grant applicants, how to handhold them through the process, what the hurdles are for small governments versus larger governments. There's a lot of learning. You don't jump in and do everything right away. It's almost like an apprenticeship process as you mature through the state government. But by being curious and asking questions and volunteering to serve on committees or help review documents, you develop a real understanding of how the department works, and you get to be in the room at the table for conversations that are important. I think a good example of this, back in about 2010, I proposed to the Maryland State Highway Administration senior staff that we really needed to look at resiliency and adaptation to climate change. And I understood the narrative from their perspective that much like at PennDOT, they're about infrastructure. So you had to talk about the increased rainfalls, the more intense storm events that would be occurring, and how this would affect asset management. And so you were able to start the discussion about sustainability in a way that made sense to the engineers whose jobs were based on maintaining the infrastructure and keeping people getting to and from places safely. When I got to Pennsylvania, we were a little further ahead. We have the Climate Action Plan from DEP, and I got to be involved in how PennDOT's role and goals and objectives in that plan were developed. So I was a kind of a go-between between PennDOT senior staff and DEP in that discussion. So I think it's harder than it looks on the outside to do good work when you're in the government. It always seems to take longer and have one more thing to do. But when you get it right, it makes it better for so many people.
So in the room where it happens. Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I'd say my favorite thing is getting to work with a lot of talented people who really care about doing their jobs well and helping people. That's just such a common thread, and all kinds of different parts that, like I mentioned, have different expertises, and are just one piece of the puzzle. So there's so many different ways you can bring your skills in and approach that to different topics. And also something that I really like being able to do is like when I work on a project and then like I really know how it was applied and helps someone, sometimes you might have to like dig in a little more and figure out how that happened. It may not happen as easily with every project, but I do have a couple examples. And I mean, I worked in public health during COVID response, which could be a whole other topic, panel topic on by itself, but and kind of different topic from this panel. But that's always going to be very meaningful and important to me, very challenging, of course, but it was deeply impactful, and it was in some ways more obvious, the impacts of what we were doing. But I did want to highlight quickly an example I worked on in Indiana on a disease called Eastern equine encephalitis. And this is a rare disease that mosquitoes can carry. So fortunately, it's rare, but it does have a fairly high likelihood of being fatal if someone gets it. So take it very seriously. And mentioned equine's part of the name, so it does affect horses. It's known for that, but can affect people too. So when we had it pop up in Indiana in 2019 for the first time in a long time, we had to take that very seriously. And so I was able to work with our vector-borne epidemiologists, work with and use my GIS skills to figure out, okay, where is this happening and where do we need to do emergency pesticide spraying to kill the mosquitoes so the disease doesn't get transmitted anymore. And then, work with the local officials to get their understanding and approval for why we need to do this. So that was one of the best examples of, something that I did that I could bring the GIS skills to the table and other knowledge about the environment and where was this disease more likely to be spread. To it led to a direct action. That was one of the best examples of that. So it was very challenging and stressful, but there was a direct impact, and we were able to get rid of those mosquitoes that could be carrying the disease and making people sick.
I appreciate that. It's not just about, having an impact. It's about working on things that are really of the moment and really matter and are important to a lot of folks. And I would underline, what everybody has said so far about and I saw all the heads nod of all of our panel in terms of working with people that you really share a common mission with. I encourage those on the call today to not underestimate that value part of a job. Jobs can come with great benefits. They can come with, important titles, but if you are not working with people that you enjoy working with, days are very long. And I do find in the sustainability world and in state government, there's a lot of people there that are really sharing a common mission and value. And so it makes it a great place to work. I saw Colleen had her hand up too.
Yeah, so trying to think about the best way to say this, but so that I would have never guessed that I would end up in a government position. Like as somebody that was a community organizer working on environmental justice, a lot of what I was doing was supporting folks that were struggling with, and pushing for accountability with the government or companies and better enforcement of regulations, or when the existing regulations weren't adequate, to push for legislative change. And so, but I have to say that like this kind of evolution really speaks to the fact that I think it's really important for folks working for nonprofits or in the private sector they're doing very good work and important work, and we need folks that are on the outside helping us move towards a vision where, you know, we have climate justice and all of the things that are encompassed in sustainability, but we also really need to have good people on the inside. And I've found I really appreciate that the folks in the energy programs office are folks that share my values. And, you know, so many of the people that I encounter do, it speaks to the values piece, but it's also it's clear in various moments where it's like, okay, this is important to have good people on the inside that are pushing in these really incremental ways. And I think regardless of whether or not you're inside or outside the government, like the way we define progress, we have to be creative about it, because if we're trying to address climate change or we're trying to push for sustainability, it's a really, the arc of history is long, you know, the quote. And so it's like, so in nonprofit work, it might, you know, success might be somebody lobbied for the first time. Whereas like within the context of government, it's like, well, you know, maybe we're changing our approach to language access so more people can fully participate in our public meetings. But I also really appreciate that even though the process is slow, like Roy said, like part of the reason why I feel good about being in this space is that I want to get stuff done. You know, like that's a mantra from this administration: get stuff done. Like, and there are tangible outcomes that are making people's lives better. And like, yeah, it's going to take a while, but we are making those incremental steps. And some of it is like communities getting resources to, you know, implement a microgrid or you know, things like that. And some of it is more like people starting to engage or feeling like if they come to a public meeting, their voice is going to be heard and it's matters. So anyway.
Couldn't say it better. Lydia.
I'm just going to keep this really brief because I'm pretty much just going to be echoing what everyone has kind of said, right? So government work, at least from my experience, it's very fulfilling. As Ali said, it's very mission driven, and everyone is kind of working towards the same goal, and that is to better the lives of folks in the Commonwealth, whatever your agency is. And for me, especially, what I also really like is the work that I'm doing. It's not been done before. This is kind of uncharted territory, right? So it's really challenging, and I'm never bored. I'm always doing something different. Yeah, it's really amazing to be able to be challenged every day in the work that you do. Not in a taxing way, of course, but in a way that you're, you know, not falling into a rut of doing the same thing over and over, and you get to use your imagination and creativity.
I think that's important because I think so often there is a stereotype that state government work can just be very rote and very by the book. So to be reminded that there are all sorts of positions that are about project management, problem solving, engaging with communities, building collaborations. I want to be mindful of the time. I know we've only got 11 minutes left. And I think you all have kind of answered a lot of our questions. So there was one question so far that I've seen in the chat, and I'll ask Matt or Mark if there's others, but the one that I saw is for both the Commonwealth Fellows. Can you speak to how you got into your fellowship and how the experience has helped you advance your professional development in environmental work? Lydia.
I would love to start this out because I think someone named Lydia asked that question, and I don't get to meet too many other Lydias. So I knew after my experience in consulting that I wanted to work in state government. My fiance's dad was a state employee for 25 years and retired from the state, and it just was something that I think that was going to be my next move, right? So much so that I put it in my graduate application. When they ask you, what are your career goals? I said, I want to work for the state of Pennsylvania. That's my end goal. And so while I was wrapping up my master's degree, I was kind of in the heavy thesis writing part of it, and starting to realize time was ticking and I need to apply to things. I honestly just stumbled upon this fellowship. I was just searching up Commonwealth jobs and came across it. Thought it was a really neat opportunity. I applied and was like, there's no way they're gonna call me back, right? They have to be getting so many applicants for this. Like, there's no way. But I got the interview and it went really well. It was probably, in my experience, the best interview of my life, honestly. It was just a really good, everything matched up, right? Everything I wanted to do matched up with what they wanted. And it was great. And just a little plug is our SciTech Fellowship is open right now for applications. So I'll drop that in the chat. But yeah, and what was the second? I'm trying to think what the second part of that question was.
I just lost the second part of the
Yeah.
question.
Oh, so it was, so how does this advance my professional development? Networking like crazy. So when I was in undergrad, I did next to zero networking. In grad school, I really got out of my comfort zone and tried to put myself out there. And I did substantial amount of networking in grad school, but oh my gosh, at the state level where I'm at now, it's like I'm meeting somebody new multiple times a day, multiple times a week. And just kind of being pushed out of my comfort zone to do more public speaking and connect with people I wouldn't normally connect with, racking my brain on how can we collaborate interagency and things like that. It's really pushed me to pretty much have to develop more professionally and be more comfortable with those things. So I really appreciate that part of the work.
So I'm just going to take another question out of the chat, and really it's actually meant for Allie, but anyone can answer. So it's about volunteering, and how was volunteering helpful to build your skill set, and what kinds of organizations do you volunteer for, and what kind of skills do you gain from that? So if anyone has experience with that, please do share. And we'll start with Allie since it was directed to Allie.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I am like a volunteer success story. No. So I went to volunteer at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in which I first got started in my career, and they actually had a job. So it just was, kind of putting my foot in the door saying I'm interested, and then I got a job, and then I was able to work my way up over the time that I'm getting my bachelor's degree and be a care manager of our birds. So we had waterfowl, raptors, and songbirds. We took in about 3,500 birds a year. We took in 7,000 animals a year. And so I learned a lot of skills that I was able to then translate to, I went into corporate after that. And that seems totally not aligned, doing wildlife rehab, then going to data management. But I was actually doing a lot of process efficiency when in the Wildlife Center to try to maximize the number of animals that we could get back into the wild. And so looking at process, looking at data to try to figure out how do we do this better. And so I was able to kind of realize that that was a skill I was learning it and apply it elsewhere. But then during COVID, I realized I'm not an introvert, number one. And so I needed to fill my time. So I started doing a bunch of volunteer work. One of the most important ones was at our local Audubon chapter. So I was eventually the president of our local Audubon chapter, which our secretary was also in her 20s. And so when I was in between jobs, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually reached out to her to have coffee, and she pointed me in the direction of DCNR. And so again, networking, as Lydia said, that was like the most important part of that experience volunteering. But I also was on the board of a local wildlife rehabilitation center, helping them get off the ground. I did a Master Watershed Stewards. I was on a Condaguinet Watershed Association board, my homeowners association board. Like, I tried it all. And so, yeah, I think it's just good to find an organization and get involved. Thanks.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to the question about what's the value of the fellowship and how that's helped develop skills. So I'm really grateful for the fellowship. Like I had said, I didn't expect to have this pivot towards government, and it was kind of just by chance as well that I found it. One of my friends in grad school had said, "Hey, have you ever thought about, you live in Carlisle, like it's right near Harrisburg. Have you thought about looking at state government?" And the timing lined up, and I applied, and I think one of the things that's really valuable about these kinds of like cohort models is that not only are you getting skills within the direct work that you're doing, the project-based work or the policy work within DEP, but also building relationships with other agencies, because there's fellowship or fellows in other departments. And I think that that's really valuable in terms of networking and thinking about where folks might go, but also for strengthening the work that we're doing. You know, like I can like call up the fellow in labor and industry, and I know that she's working on some research related to heat, climate, heat injuries and workers' comp. And so that like directly relates to my work. And then also just the idea of having professional development and an investment. I think also mentors are really important. I like the fact that the fellowship has a built-in mentor as a part of it. But regardless, going out and seeking mentors, if there's a position that you're excited about, like reaching out to them and saying, hey, can I connect with you? Can I hear more about your journey? And more often than not, people are really excited about sharing what they do and why they do it and why they're excited about it. So don't ever be afraid to reach out if you're trying to figure it out.
Thanks, Colleen. And Peter, do you see anything that we missed? We have probably time for one final question.
Yeah,
Or
well,
we-
it's sort of one question from Victoria was just in particular where she said that she's looking at a lot of job listings asking for prior experience and how to do NEPA permitting, and were there any recommendations on how you get your foot in the door? That kind of classic chicken and the egg problem. You need experience to get the job, you need the job to get the experience. But do any of our panel have any thoughts on that? And I did also want to highlight that Roy and Lydia and Ali and others have all been putting great links in the chat and additional information. So please be checking that out. But any thoughts on Victoria's last question there? Permitting experience, Ali.
Yeah, so I think the volunteering aspect is a good pathway because a lot of organizations, especially grassroots organizations, do a lot with NEPA, and it might not be direct, but you can learn a lot about it and then, kind of pivot, right? And like explain your skill set. And it might not be direct, but you have had NEPA experience and therefore you could do this job. And so I know that a lot of people may not have the capacity to volunteer, and I totally respect that. And that is a difficulty that I think needs to be addressed in general. But it is a pathway, I think, to getting that experience, and honestly, just self-learning might be another tool, and then you can talk about that in an interview, and that shows a lot of motivation and ability to stay curious and learn, and a lot of people just are interested in that skill set. So yeah, I'd say those are my recommendations. Thanks.
Okay, so I just want to thank the panelists, and we're getting like hooked for time here. So it was a great job, everyone. Appreciate everyone's time today. This was a great session. Just thank you all for participating. Again, the webinar is recorded and will be available in a week or two. And please join us next month, April 18th, for the Keystone State Challenge Academy. And just again, thanks and have a great weekend, and appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you.
And